Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Rumi Forum. Very pleased to have with us tonight Ms. Katharine Branning. She has written a book, Yes, I Would Love Another Glass of Tea, An American Woman's Letters to Turkey. She's here to speak with us tonight about her book. I would like to first read a little bit about Katharine. Katharine Branning has degrees from the University of Paris, in Sorbonne, and the Ecole du Louvre, where she majored in Islamic arts with a specialty in Islamic glass. A graduate of the Pratt Institute School of Information and Library Science, she has been a librarian at the French Institute of Architecture in Paris, France, and at the French Embassy Cultural Services, and the Alliance Française in New York City. For her work promoting the French language and culture through the creation of numerous libraries in both France and the United States, she has been awarded the Ordre of National Merit from the President of France, one of the nation's highest honors. She has studied the Turkish language and literature at the Institute of Languages, of Oriental Languages in Paris with Professor Talat Halman at New York University. And as an independent researcher and glass artist, she has conducted annual field work relative to architecture and decorative arts in Turkey every year since 1978. She currently lives in New York City, where she is Vice President of Education at the French Institute of the Alliance Française. Please welcome Katharine Branning.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of you for coming tonight. It's appropriate at this week of the International Day of the Women that I should speak to you as a woman, writing a book about another woman,
Yes.
And how our views of Turkey over a distance of 300 years came together, and so that's basically what I'm talking about in this
Yes.
book. So thank you all for coming.
So, how did you come to write this book?
How did I come to write this book?
Yes.
This book was a dialogue between, well, first of all, I have been going to Turkey now for over 30 years. Every year for 30 years, I go, I spend a month to 6 weeks at a time. I do research on the Seljuk era of Turkey, which is the period of the 13th century, basically, that preceded the Ottomans. And I have been going there and making friends and getting to know this country very well. And I have now made a wonderful friend who is a writer. Muhsin İlyas Subaşı. He's a very famous poet and writer lives in Kayseri. And one day he said to me, "You know, Katharine, you should write down some of the things about what you've seen over the past 30 years. I'm sure people would be interested in hearing about it." And after he said that, I dismissed it totally, thinking, who wants to hear about my experiences? Who wants to hear about anything I would have to say that's of any interest? But I decided as a gift for him, I would write down some of my stories and some of my impressions of Turkey. So I decided to base the book on a series of letters to Lady Mary Montagu. I'm sure many of you know who she is. She was an English woman. She was a writer who went to Turkey in 1716. She stayed there for 14 months. She was the wife, she went there as the wife of the British ambassador. Her husband stayed in Edirne, where he was working, trying to broker a peace treaty with Sultan Ahmet III in his war with the Austrians. And she went and she stayed in Constantinople. She wrote a series of letters. She was a very famous writer herself. She wrote a series of letters home to friends and family. There's about 50 of them. They were published after her death. Approximately 15 or 20 of them were written while she was in Turkey. The others were written while she was coming on the road down and then on the road back after they went home. She stayed for about 14 months. And her letters were published after her death. They're called the Embassy Letters. They have been in print for over 300 years. They have never gone out of print. There's thousands of copies are sold every year.
Amazing.
The reason why they've always impressed me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that was impressed by them, obviously, is because she was a very wonderful writer. She has a very, very clever pen, but she was very non-judgmental. she never criticized. Most people, when they come abroad from another culture, they always say, oh, I don't like the way they do this, or why do they put ice in their drinks, and why do they... She never did any of that. She was just saying, this is the way it is. She was an ethnographer in the greatest sense, in that she just noted everything. She described everything with great beauty, and she never allowed herself to pass judgment. And I always admired that, because I said, when you look at the world, even in our daily lives, but especially when you go into other cultures, you must always have that eye that says, I'm going to try to look at this culture, this situation, whatever, with as clear a view as I can, and not try to bring my baggage with it. So that is basically something that I've tried to do in my professional life. I work bringing the French culture and literature to American public. And so it is something that I wanted to do in this book as well, is to talk about Turkey in a very non-judgmental way, inspired by Lady Mary. So what I did was I set up a series of letters with Lady Mary. I went back and I reread her letters, and I noted all of the themes that she talked about. She talked about religion. She talked about the great joy of life the Turks have. She talked about the beauty of nature. She talked about a lot about Turkish women. And I basically wrote a series of letters back to her. Each letter is on a theme where I'm keeping her, I'm saying, well, you know, in 1716, you saw this about Turkish women. Well, this is what I've seen. So it's basically a dialogue with her, and it's allowed us to share our impressions of this country, which are very, very similar. At 300 years distant, they're still very, very similar. The traditions of Turkey have maintained themselves for this period of time.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. I mean, her thoughts on Ottoman culture and Ottoman life, spawned a lot of dialogue as well, I believe, once she returned, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of the impression she made upon some of the Orientalist thought about Turkey. Can you expand a little bit on that?
She had the great opportunity, it's a stunning letter to read. She was invited to go to the Turkish baths, which is completely, this whole custom of the public bath did not exist, of course, in England in 1716. So she was invited to go. She wanted to go. She wanted to see what this was all about, so she went. So you can imagine her amazement when she walked in, and there was this, the Turkish bath. So she was quite brave about it, I would think. I don't know if I would have the courage that she did. But she went in, and she, as I said, as an ethnographer, she described everything. She described how the women were, what they looked like, how the setup was at the bath, and everything. She also had the opportunity to visit with two wives of pashas, very wealthy pashas of the Ottoman Empire at that time. One where she describes the elaborate dishes that were served to her with napkins embroidered in gold. She didn't want to use them, they were so beautiful. The array of 40 dishes that were put in front of her, except the diamonds the size of hazelnuts that the lady wore, etc. She relates all of this very, very clearly. So she went to two homes and was received with great pomp by these Turkish women. So she relates all of this. When Europe read these letters afterwards, they were intrigued by these letters. They were intrigued because she, as a woman, could enter into a world that had not been really open to many people. Certainly no one had ever been to the baths before and had related them like she did. So many Europeans, notably the painter Ingres, read that letter and in his mind imagined what this must be like. So he painted that famous painting of the odalisque and the Turkish baths, which inspired an entire craze for Orientalism. But it was his imagination. It was his imagination, and also the imagination of wondering what it was like to live in a harem, to live in this culture where women lived together, didn't interact as much with men as in the Western culture. So this basically, her embassy letter spurred this entire movement of the late 18th and 19th centuries of Orientalism in Europe. For many erroneous concepts were conveyed by this movement, but also
Possibly not what she was intending.
Absolutely not what she was intending at all.
Exactly.
Because as I said, she always spoke with great respect. She never once said that, never said anything. She was very impressed by Turkish women, I think as we all are today. She was impressed by their intelligence, by their absolute charm, by their friendliness, by their loveliness, their attention to fashion. This impressed her very much.
Yeah, I think about the gold embroidered napkins,
right.
and and I think about my many Turkish friends and how exceptional their hospitality is, and to detail, and just it's interesting to learn that has just come.
It's continued. It's absolutely continued. So many of the book was very interesting because when I was started to write her, and I imagined who she was, and I really sat down and imagined that I was entering into writing her a letter. I was so amazed that, because I would start each letter off with an excerpt from one of her letters, and it was just like jump right in. It was just like, let me answer you, as if she had written this letter to me 30 days ago and not 300 years ago. So Turkish culture has remained very solid in many of the core values of that society. Many of the core components of the culture are still the same today.
Absolutely. And so parallels, you say that it's like as if you're writing to her today. So how do you see and what are the parallels, what are the distinctions that you're seeing amongst Turkish women today? Maybe the same things, but what are the other things that you're seeing
she talked a lot about the importance of children, and we have a few children here on She talked about the importance of children in the lives of women, that this was just the basis of Turkish life. She talked about the importance of family. She talked about the importance of food. She talked about the importance of living life beautifully. I mean, the French think that they've invented this concept of les arts de vivre, all the things that make our lives beautiful, such as gardens and wine and food and art and all of those things. Well, the Turks had already figured that all out long before, and she talks about the grace with which Turks live. That's the way it is today as well. She also talks about their great sense of pride in being Turkish. She talks about the multiculturalism that she found in Turkey. She said, I have one servant that speaks this language and one servant that speaks Albanian and the other one speaks Greek. And then she said, it's a real Tower of Babel here in my own home. So that same multiculturalism exists today in Turkey. It's a culture that's always been very, very tolerant of many groups coming together. So those are some of the themes that are still very much in evidence in today's Turkey.
And what are you seeing that maybe is a bit different, if anything?
From Lady Mary's letters, probably I wouldn't say anything is different. I mean, she basically the topics that she talked about are still the same. There's still misunderstandings about the differences between the West and the East. She talked a lot about that. She talked a lot also about the literature of Turkey, which she found to be extremely enchanting. She tried to translate poems on her own, and she was very proud of that. She also talks about how she had a tutor who taught her Turkish. She apparently learned it very easily. I don't know how she managed that, but
yes, neither do I.
She did,
especially at that time.
Yeah.
It was quite richer
but she also
today.
had a tutor who spent time and talked to her about Islam. She was very open to learning about this faith. She was not at all judgmental about saying, I'm from a Christian country, so this religion can't be anything worth studying. She had this tutor, and he worked with her for a long time, and she learned much about Islam and garnered a very appreciative view of the commonalities between her religious background.
Did she talk about where that came from, that openness?
No, I think it's because she was an extremely intelligent woman. She was an extremely educated woman, maybe because the fact that she was the wife of a diplomat. She knew that she had a role to play as an ambassador herself. I think it just became just because she was a very, very intelligent woman, very, very educated. And we all know that the more that you're educated, the more, you know, barriers fall. And so she had just a very wide vision onto her world. Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, I think I'm going to hand it over to the audience, and I have a few more questions, but towards the end. So, ladies and gentlemen, yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you talk about the education of Turkish women. Of course, this aristocratic lady met with the aristocratic women.
Absolutely.
And the lives of women in the villages would have been very different, and I don't know if she managed to meet those women. But those who would have been her peers, what kind of education would they have gotten?
You're absolutely right in saying, bringing to the point that, and I talk about that in the book, is that she was being received in the homes of women who had diamond earrings the size of hazelnuts. I don't know if you have any friends that have those kind of earrings. I certainly don't. So she never went out of Pera. She never went out of Constantinople, whereas I have spent, you know, so much time in the other parts of Turkey. So I make that parallel with her, saying, you know, you had one viewpoint onto a certain level of culture and a certain level of the population, but there's, you know, other things, and I try to tell her a little bit about that. So her viewpoint onto Turkish women was, of course, through a very, very narrow lens. So she does not talk. She's not aware of the other parts of the existence of or education or lives of women that were out in the middle of Anatolia, for example. She does not talk about the education of Turkish women. She just talks about their great civility, their great sense of gracious manners, but she does not talk about those things at all.
But from your own knowledge of the field, what would one expect from an upper class woman in that time in Turkey? What would she have had private tutors?
She would have had private tutors, just as many of the rich people in Europe at that time. You did not go to schools; you had private tutors. So they would have had private tutors. The Ottoman court, as we all know, had schools for the harem. So there would have been an upper class woman would have had a private tutor, absolutely.
What would they have been tutored in?
Literature. They would have been tutored in poetry.
Arts, yeah.
The fine arts of living. Poetry was literature was a big topic. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, Kyle. Wait for the...
Hi. My name's Kyle. I have a question. What similarities do you draw as a woman and as an author, but more importantly, between you and Lady Montagu? As I can't help but feel that maybe you became intimate with her in some form or fashion.
Very funny because an Israeli professor once asked me, he goes, well, has Lady Mary ever answered you back? And I laughed and I said, well, actually she does all the time. Absolutely. Lady Mary was an extremely independent woman. I'm an extremely independent woman. Lady Mary believed in the power of education. I believe in the power of education. I've dedicated my life to it. She believed in the power of the pen. I do too. She was a woman who believed that you needed to be open to other cultures, that you needed to never place yourself above or below anyone, that we are all together in this world. That's what I've based my entire professional life on. So these are kind of similarities. That she was a headstrong woman. I think I'm kind of headstrong. She was very charming. She was a very, very strong woman. She had a personal challenge in her life, which I think would have buckled most of us. She contracted right before she left for Turkey to be the ambassador's wife. On Christmas Eve, she contracted smallpox. We forget what smallpox is because since 1977 it's been eradicated, and that's another story that you'll read in the book. It's due to basically Lady Mary Montagu that smallpox is no longer the plague that it was for the world. Kings died of it, people died of it, children died of it. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible scourge on the world. if you survived it, 1 person in 7 survived it. If you did survive it, you were terribly scarred and pitted. And she was a famed beauty, an absolutely famed beauty. And after she survived smallpox, she was disfigured. And she went in to carry on with her life with her head high. It did not stop her at all. So I look at her and I imagine, what must it be like to have had that experience happen to you? You know, where her identity was probably somewhat fixed on the fact that she was this glittering beauty of the London social circles, and then all of a sudden to have this terrible thing happen to you. But she didn't let it stop her. I mean, she just kept on. She continued writing. She continued to be a very important person in many people's lives. And I admired that in her, and it's also just for me a lesson in how you must really confront any adversity that's given to you and just say, I will go on. And the story of what she did with what happened to her to combat smallpox is quite a remarkable one. So those are kind of the similarities that I feel with her. I should wish I could be that much a writer as she is, that much of a strong moral fiber as she had, but she's definitely a role model for me, even in my imagination. Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm Kathy Aquilina. I would love to hear about your artistry yourself, your glass work, and just wondered too if Lady Montagu was an artist or obviously an appreciator of art, probably.
As a writer, she's an artist. You know, the white page is the same as the white canvas. You kind of just say, okay, where am I going here? So she was very, her observations onto what she saw were, obviously she was an aesthete. She saw beauty. She could interpret beauty. She incorporated beauty into her life, so she definitely was an artist. I became very, very interested in the Seljuk period of Turkey, which is a period that's not very well known, even by Turks. It was the period, as I said, of the 13th century. It was sandwiched in between the Crusades and the Mongol invasions. It was this comet across the sky of a brilliant civilization that lasted only about 150 years, but in that 150 years laid the basis for what the Turkey is today. An opening to tolerance for all peoples, the establishment of all the infrastructures of governance and education. That they were very interested. They globalized trade. That's what I'm basically interested in, was the caravanserais that the Seljuk sultans built along in the middle of Anatolia. The Seljuk sultans were very, very smart. They knew that in order to build up their country, they had to get commerce in there. They had to trade. They had to bring goods in. They had to bring goods out. So they, in order to trade in those days, this is the Wild West or the Wild East back then, roads were very dangerous. It was very difficult. So the Seljuk sultans, notably Aladdin Keykubat, active around 1220, established this entire program of building these caravanserais, which are kind of like modern-day truck stops. I mean, if we can call it like that. They offered housing. They offered a place for the caravans for the camels to stay for the night, to rest. The goods were locked up so that no one had to worry about getting their things stolen. And this was for 3 days. You were allowed to stay in a caravanserai, all at the expense of the state. They were free. But the Seljuk sultans knew that that was the only way that they were going to build up their empire, was through trade. Well, this is pretty prescient. I mean, this is what we're living today in the Turkey of today, is exactly what's, the opening of all the borders, trade with the East and the West in Turkey. And this architecture that they built not only these caravanserais, but they also built madrasas, institutions of higher learning. They also built mosques. They built baths. They built tekes for religious activities. They're very strong. It's almost like Romanesque architecture in Europe. It's very strong. It's very direct, and it was very, very appealing to me. I also liked the fact that architecture was put to the use of building an empire. It wasn't just for prettiness. They had a set program, and they went out and they built these buildings of firmness, commodity, and delight, as Vitruvius said. They were beautiful to look at, they serviced well, and they were very true. And so I have there's about 100 of these Hans still standing. We think that there were probably originally over 300 of them. And they have all been restored over the past 2 years. The Turkish government has finally realized that they're very important and has restored many of them. So you can visit them now and imagine what life was like back then. But they're very beautiful. I have a website, www.turkishhan.org, where you can see all of these and even plan a trip to visit them. But they're very inspiring buildings because you walk in them and you step back in time and you say, what must it have been like to try to do business in the 13th century? What must it have been like to live back then? And so it's you suspend your disbelief when you walk into these buildings, and they are very evocative for this country that really built itself up from the ground up and continues to do so today. I mean, if we look at, that's another one of the reasons I like the Seljuk era so much, is if we look at the Turks of today, the Turkish tigers of today, it's basically the Seljuk era all over again. This great encouragement of trade, very hardworking, very industrious people, setting goals for themselves to trade, to make their culture and their goods known to the whole world. So that's what I've done, and I'm very interested also in decorative arts as well, rugs, and I'm a glass artist myself, so. There's not very much glass in the Ottoman tradition, but carpets and glass to me are very similar in the sense that there is a great explosion of color. There's a great detail. They're very difficult matters to manipulate. To make a rug is, to this day, I'm in awe of every rug that I see, that a woman sat there and thought out this pattern and kept it all in mind, and as she's working, never lost track of where she was going. I mean, it's quite an astounding artistic feat to do that, to make a rug.
In terms of Lady Montagu, what was she describing the things that she saw too? I would be interested in more. Like,
she described,
the tiles?
She did. A very funny remark she made when she went to the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, which I'm sure many of you have been to, and she saw the Islamic tiles on the wall. She went up to them and she said they had like jewels in them. You know, the glaze is so thick on many of those tiles that it does look like blobs of jewels. And she called it Japanned China, because she had never seen this, but to her it looked like something that came from Japan. That was a very astute remark to make for somebody in 1716. And she also talked about, she didn't talk about rugs that much, but she talked about furniture. She talked about the wood carvings where you put books, where you put with slippers. She talked about, china. She talked about little objects. She talked about the clothes. She was just absolutely astounded by the clothes, the Turkish women, the beautiful brocades, these diamonds again, And in one scene where she said she went to this woman's house, and when they were getting ready to leave, the woman escorted her in to get her coat, and this woman had negligently scattered all of her furs so that Lady Mary would see how rich she was. And so Lady Mary describes all of these furs that she saw that this woman had. So it's all of these little things that she described. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have Zarina.
Okay.
Can we get...
My name is Zarina Shakir, and I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. I'm interested in your studies and your travels being in France and in Turkey and probably other places, and what your impressions have been of Muslim women and some of the challenges that they have been facing in France around the covering, and then in Turkey, there seems to be some sort of parallel piece there. And then the second question is, how did you get involved in glass? I mean, that's really very specific, and something that I'm thinking and glass comes from sand, I understand. So how did you can answer either one first, but I'm very interested in both of those.
Okay. The glass work was absolutely by chance. When I was studying at the Ecole du Louvre, your graduate degree had to be in writing what is known as a catalogue raisonné of a collection in the Louvre Museum, which meant that you had to basically do an inventory of all of the leather bindings of Persian books, or you had to do of all the metalwork. And the only thing that hadn't been done was glass, because no one wanted to do it. No one thought it was exciting. And I looked at it and I said, but glass is magic. Glass comes from dirt and it becomes sunshine. Yeah. To me it was just magic, so I was thrilled that nobody had wanted to do this, so that's why I started with glass. So while I was describing all of these and working so hard and everything, I said there's no way I can understand truly this matter unless I make it myself. I mean, now, you know, I look at a piece of glass now, I know exactly how it was made, because I can imagine how I would make it. So I needed to know that. I needed to know from the inside out, because I felt that that would give my work a little more soul. So that's when I started blowing glass, and then once I started blowing glass, it just all came together, and that's why I stayed with it all of these years. The issue of women in Turkey, women in America, women, Muslim women in France is a very complicated one. Thank you for that very easy question to answer. I suppose I could answer it as a French-educated, extremely secular person that I am. I could answer it that way. I could say I understand very well the position of certain European countries on this issue. I could answer it as a woman who has a great sympathy for Turkey and Muslim women, who has many Muslim friends, who understands the reality of the Muslim woman in her daily life and how she practices her faith and what that headscarf means to her. I could answer it that way. Or I could answer it like Lady Mary. And Lady Mary would probably say, what is the real issue here? The real issue is, very appropriately this week, the rights of women. And what is important is that women have the rights to decide their education, to decide their sexuality, the number of children they will have, who they will marry, how they will manage their money, their place in society. Those rights, their right to vote, their right to be equal citizens, those are the rights that are important. And whether a woman is allowed or not allowed to wear a headscarf is not the issue. The issue is, does she have those rights, and are they being respected? Because that's what we really need to see in that whole issue, is to really look there.
As a rights issue.
As a rights issue. I mean, there's so many women in the world. We all know this because many of us here women. We know the struggle. We still earn 70 cents to every man's dollar. I look at my profession, where 95% of my profession is women and 95% of library directors are men. How did that happen? There's something really strange there. So, you know, we need to look at those questions and say, you know, what is our position in the world today? And it's very, very difficult still to find our way. And those are the issues that we need to look at first, more than anything. In any culture, and in any religion, any group of women, we still have a long way to go to make sure that our rights are respected.
Yeah. This is very true.
You mentioned that Lady Mary felt that learning Turkish was easy. At the same time, you said that you didn't feel that way. So could you please talk a little bit about that?
Yes, okay. Well, I'm going to say that Lady Mary apparently spoke Latin by the time she was 8. I mean, she was, I think, kind of off the charts. You know, she's that kid that always, you know, threw the curve off. So she's obviously very smart, had a gift for languages. And I'm going to say she probably had a tutor that worked with her 2 or 3 hours a day. Okay, we don't have that luxury. She was also in situ. She was living in Turkey, so she was absorbing. So it was in 14 months, plus we don't know. She said she spoke Turkish very well, but you know, we don't know. I'm sure she did though. I'm sure she did. So it's not surprising perhaps that she made astounding progress in her Turkish studies. Are you learning Turkish here? Yes, it's hard, isn't it? Okay, stick with it.
Do you have any advice for these
Stick with it.
hardworking students?
It's a difficult language because it's so different, but the rewards of learning a language, as you know, are beyond being able to conjugate a sentence. They're getting to understand what that because there's no language without culture, there's no culture without language. So you are opening yourselves to this entire, like Lady Mary, to an entirely different world that will teach you to look at your own world so much more clearly. Turkish is a difficult language just because I use the analogy of a train with all these coal cars. You know, the Turkish sentence is composed of all of these elements.
Yes.
The suffixes, it's also like a kebab, you know, a big kebab there. And it's also the internal construction of clauses is so different than in English. And then you have to wait till all the way to the end to find the verb. I mean, that's very frustrating.
Yes.
But I find it a very difficult language, but at the same time a very rewarding language because so much of it, I find it reflects culture so much. There's so many references to history in their language. There's so many references to religion in their language. And so you really, and it's so imaged. The idioms in Turkish are just wonderful. They're so, so many of them are based in rural things, are just stupendous. So stick with it. You'll get there. And remember that learning a language, I run a language school that has 7,000 students in it, so I like to tell my students who are adult learners like you are, you're here to have fun. And so what if you massacre a sentence? So what if you're not understanding everything? The fact is that you're trying, and you're actually learning more than you realize. So please stay with it.
All right. Well, I will ask.
Thank you very much.
I have just a couple more questions to wind up. So, having traveled for so many years to Turkey, I myself have traveled several times, countless. I don't usually say the number when someone asks anymore, because it just sounds absurd. But what? It's probably not been one thing, but what has been or made the most impression upon you, having looked back, and of course you will continue to go, but what has been the biggest impression for you, upon you, these years?
The biggest lesson, or I'm going to answer that as the biggest lesson Turkey has given me, and that is a word I learned, first of all in a Turkish class, and when I was out in the field I learned what it really meant. And that word is the Turkish word saygı. Okay, which means respect. The Turkish concept of the word respect is something that we have no idea. Turks respect everyone and everything in their life. It's to a degree that we cannot even begin to understand. They bring a dignity and a consideration and a compassion to other people through this concept of respect that is a lesson for the world. That is the greatest lesson and the greatest strength that I have learned from Turkey, is that you must respect everyone. You must respect everything. You must give every person in front of you that benefit of the doubt, which is, I respect you. And through respect, you hope that will lead to tolerance, and through that you'll hope that that will lead to love. And basically that is what we need to have more of in our world. And I think it also, I can never understand the person that you are, but because you grew up in a different place than I did, you speak a different language than I do. But if I go beyond that and I respect the commonalities that we share, well, I realize that you're a woman just like I am, and you laugh at the same things that I do, and you have the same hopes and the same dreams that I do. So it makes respect a little easier. And so that is the basic, the greatest lesson that Turkey has taught me, which I've really incorporated into my work as a cross-cultural communicator for what I do, is that, you know, we get into these bubbles. We get into these bubbles of concepts. I'm a vegetarian, and I'm a carnivore, and I'm gay, and I'm not, and I'm a man, and I'm a woman, and I'm, you know, we have to make sure we don't stay in those bubbles, and that we use respect to say that I'm going to try to understand and communicate with a bubble that's the opposite one to mine. And that is what Turkey has taught me, is that we really must try to go beyond who we are and see into the other person, respecting them all the way.
Right. It's beautiful. And lastly, just want your thoughts on what's happening right now. As we all know, many things are changing in the world, in particular in the relative neighborhood of Turkey. And Turkey has also come up as, you know, this is an example for these countries to go off and look at that and how that country has transformed itself, so on and so forth. Your thoughts, if any, on this?
Well, it's this. I'll tell you a story about this. When I started traveling to Turkey in 1978, it was not the country it is today. Those were some dark days, and my poor mother used to get so worried. She said, "Why are you going over there all the time?" She goes, "What is it about this country that keeps pulling you back?" And I said, "Mom, I'm going to answer you this." And this was in 1978. I said, "I believe this country is going to be a leader in the future. I think this country is going to be a role model for the world. Now, remember, Mom, they're our NATO ally." Remember that, Mom? She said, "Okay." She didn't quite understand all of that. And then I distinctly remember, and came very sharply back to me, I distinctly remember watching with her on the television in 1979 the signing of the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty with Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. And I remember watching with her, and I was very, very moved by this attempt to craft a peace in this very difficult area of the world. Sadat said his role model was Ataturk, by the way, and I turned to my mother at that time and I said, "This is what I'm talking about, Mom, because this signature on this piece of paper is not going to solve the problems of this world in that area. And Turkey is going to be a country that's going to help motivate these people to say, this is where you can go. We have a democracy, we have Saiga, we have tolerance for all the people that live here pretty much. And this is what you can be, our success story."
Wow, how prophetic.
And here we are 32 years later.
Yes.
Still on this road.
Yes.
But there's one country that never wavered on that road, and that's Turkey. It is the one country in this area that has never compromised itself, has always stayed steadfast onto its ideals of democracy. And that is a huge, huge role model for the rest of the world to follow in that area. So I don't know if I was, at the time I thought, well, maybe I'm a little naive in believing this, but I still believe it. I still believe that you lead by model. You don't tell people what to do, you just are, and they will follow. Yeah. And that's what I hope Turkey will do.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
It's very important. All right.
Thank you very much.
More questions, please join me in thanking Katharine.
Thank you.